So you guys just learned about absolute value, and we're going to talk about how absolute value relates to distances on a coordinate plane. So you see this coordinate plane right here is being used as a map, and one of the most common things that you do on a map is figure out, well, how far is one place from another, because that's trip planning, right? So when you're looking at this, it's pretty obvious to tell how far they are apart, especially if they're on the same lines, okay? But what if you weren't given the coordinate plane? Then it's going to be a little bit harder to tell, and a lot of times you're going to have the coordinates of places and not the grid to be able to actually count on, okay? And this is definitely true when you're using a real map like longitude and latitude on the Earth. So when we have the game store here, we have a library, science lab, pet store. They are all right here on the same, they have the same y or x coordinate right here, right? So let's just talk about the game store real quick, and we're going to compare it first to the library. And as you can see, they are one block apart. Okay, that's really easy to see on the map, but if you were just given the coordinates, the game store's coordinates are 3, 3, and the library's coordinates are 3, 2. So we have game store and we have library here. Okay, and you can see that the x coordinates are the same, right? Because we had to go along the x coordinate the same distance. So that's not going to help us find how far apart they are, but the y coordinate does. So you can see the y coordinate is different. Over here we have 3 and 2. So 3 minus 2 is 1. So all you had to do is subtract those y coordinates to find the difference in them, to find the distance. And that would be 1 unit, or let's just call those blocks, since that's kind of how it looks like. This is a city, and those would be blocks, right? So, and you can see that that would be 1 block apart, and 3 minus 2 is 1. So now let's talk about the science lab. All right, so again, if we compare that to the game store is at 3, 3, and then the science lab is at 3, 1, right? So again, your x coordinates are the same, y coordinates are different, and so therefore 3 minus 2 is 2. So these two places should be 2 blocks apart, and if we look over here, oops, if we look over here, they are 1, 2 blocks apart, right? All right, so that's all easy, except for the fact when you have our pet store down here. That's when it, excuse my pun, gets a little fishy, all right? So let's compare game store again, but this time to our pet store coordinates. So our game store coordinates are 3, 3, and our pet store coordinates, I go 3 across, and then I have to go 1 down, so that's actually -1. All right, so this is where it gets a little bit tricky, because we know that we would subtract our y coordinates. Well, then we have 3 minus -1, which you will be doing by the end of this year, but we're not quite there yet, okay? And understanding this is going to help you understand how to do this equation, okay? So I just want you to know that this equation would be 3 minus -1, but we're going to talk about it in terms of absolute value, all right? So again, we're going to be talking about just our y coordinates here. So the absolute value of 3 is 3, which means that the science lab is 3 away from our 0 point, which is the x-axis, right? Okay, and then -1, so our absolute value of -1 we know is 1, right? Because here's -1 here, and it is 1 away from our 0 value, or our x-axis, okay? So now that we know that this is 1 unit away, and the game store is 3 units away from our x-axis, then we add those together. So a little bit different. We're going to add those together and get 4 blocks. And as you can see over here, if you're just counting the blocks visually, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So they are 4 blocks apart. So you can see how that works. Now it's not only not only works whenever you have the same x-axis, it also, or x-coordinate, it also works when you have the same y-coordinate. So let's look over, and we're going to be looking at the science lab and the hospital. It's good to know the distances between those two places. Accidents happen, right? Okay, so again, we have the science lab. We know that those coordinates are 3, 1, right? But then the hospital's coordinates, the x coordinate is different because we move to the left. So that would be -2. But again, we just went up 1. So our y-coordinate is actually the same. So for this one, we would be finding the difference in the x coordinates. So that would be 3 minus -2. Well, again, that looks a little bit confusing. So let's talk about the absolute values and how far these are away from, this time we're talking about how far they are away from this y-axis, right? Okay, so talking about 3, so 3's absolute value is 3, so we know that the science lab is 1, 2, 3 blocks from the y-axis, and now we're going to figure out how far the hospital is from that y-axis. So to do that, we can find the absolute value of -2, sorry, which is 2. So we know that it is 1, 2 blocks from the y-axis. So now, once you know those two absolute values, we know that they are actually 5 blocks from each other, because if you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they are 5 blocks from each other. Okay, so now let's talk about the game store and what is this? The gift shop. Okay. So the game stores, let me erase this real quick. The game store's coordinates again are 3, 3. So we're going to write game store is 3, 3. But then the gift shop over here is -2 and then up 3, right? So again, I'm just going to say S for shop, okay? So again, you notice that the y-coordinates are actually the same here, but the x-coordinates are not. Okay, I want you to pause the video really quick and see if you could do this just by coordinates. So find the absolute value of 3, find the absolute value of 2, and see if you can figure out their distances just from the coordinates. Okay, so hopefully you paused the video and did that. So now let's do that together. All right, so the absolute value of 3 is 3, and the absolute value of -2 is 2. So what that means is that if you look over here on the map, that the game store is 1, 2, 3 away from the y-axis, and the gift shop is 1, 2 away from the y-axis, right? And if I add those up together, I get 5, which means that they are 5 blocks apart from each other. And if we count those, we can see that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in this IXL, it's going to be a lot simpler to just look and be able to count on the grid itself. But I just wanted you to see the relationship between the distance on the map and how you could figure that out if you didn't have the map, if you only had the coordinates. And that's going to be coming soon. Not this year, but it's going to be coming soon, where you're going to have the coordinates and you just have to figure out the difference. And you can always draw a coordinate plane. And if you have small coordinates like this, that's definitely possible. But what if your coordinates were in the hundreds or thousands, which definitely happens when you're talking about lots of data and lots of area. So you would want to be able to also figure it out by just using the coordinates. So you guys are doing great. I miss y'all, and hopefully we'll see you soon.